Across the galaxy, impossible reports, Emergilians dying to protect human children. A soldier betrayed his own kind, a village chose extinction, a monster became a guardian. Then Earth sent a message that froze every empire. They protected, one of ours now, we protect them. The sky was already breaking apart before the first scream reached him. It came in distant waves, at first low, rumbling echoes rolling across the ruined horizon, before rising into something sharper, something unbearable. Explosions carved through the atmosphere, tearing starships into burning fragments that fell like dying stars. Entire buildings collapsed in slow, choking clouds of dust. Their remains swallowed by fire and ash. Kael'thar moved through it all without hesitation. War was not chaos to him. It was structure, order, purpose. At least it had always been. Advance, no survivors. Commander Erya's voice cut through the channel, cold, precise, unquestionable. Kael'thar obeyed, stepping over debris and bodies alike. Some wore armor like his own. Others, smaller, softer, were human. His gaze lingered on one for half a second too long. A human figure curled near a shattered wall, unmoving. He forced himself to look away. They are the enemy. That thought had guided him his entire life. It was supposed to make everything simple. But today, it didn't. Single quotes. Something about this battlefield felt wrong. Not quieter. Not safer. Just heavier. As if the war itself had begun to weigh on him. Ahead, a transport lay broken open. Its hull peeled apart like fragile metal instead of reinforced alloy. Flames still licked at its edges. Smoke rising into a sky already choked with destruction. A human evacuation vessel. Standard procedure. Confirm no survivors, and move on. Kael'thar raised his weapon and approached. Then he heard it soft, barely audible beneath the crackling fire. Hello. He froze. The word didn't belong here. Slowly, cautiously, he moved closer, scanning the wreckage. There beneath a collapsed section of the hull something shifted. Small. Alive. He pushed the debris aside and found her, a child. Her face was streaked with ash, her eyes wide and glassy with fear. She looked impossibly fragile in the middle of so much destruction, like something that should never have existed in a place like this. Kael'thar raised his weapon. Training took over immediately. Target identified. Human. Eliminate. His finger tightened slightly on the trigger. The child didn't scream, didn't run. She just looked at him, trembling. Mama. The word landed harder than any weapon ever could. For a moment, everything stopped. The fire, the noise, the war. All of it faded behind that single, broken sound. Kael'thar hesitated. It was a small pause. A fraction of a second, but in war, moment is everything. His weapon lowered. Not because of orders. Not because of logic. Because of something he didn't understand. Report, Kael'thar. Commander Erya again. Sharper, this time. Watching. Waiting. Kael'thar looked at the child. Then at the burning wreckage around them. Then back at her. No survivors, he said. The lie came easier than it should have. He reached down slowly. The child flinched at first but didn't pull away. Instead, her small hand grabbed onto his armor, gripping it tightly like it was the only solid thing left in her world. That was the moment. Everything changed. He carried her away from the wreckage, moving farther from the front lines with every step. The sounds of battle slowly dulled behind them, fading into distant thunder. She didn't speak much after that, but she watched him constantly. At first, there was fear in her eyes. That was expected. Then confusion, and eventually, something else. Trust. Kael. Single quotes. Tar. Didn't know what to do with that. He gave her water. She drank slowly, carefully, like she understood it was limited. He offered her a ration pack. She opened it, sniffed it, and made a small face of obvious disapproval. For a brief, strange moment, something unfamiliar stirred inside him. It might have been humor. He wasn't sure. Night fell quickly on the ruined world, bringing with it a biting cold that cut through damaged armor. The child began to shiver, her small body trembling despite her efforts to stay still. Without thinking, Kael'thar removed his thermal layer and wrapped it around her. His suit immediately registered the loss of insulation. Warning signals flickered across his vision. He ignored them. She leaned into the warmth, her breathing slowly evening out. Why am I doing this? The question surfaced quietly. He had no answer. By the second day, his strength was fading. His injuries, ignored for too long, were beginning to take their toll, and that's when they found him. Figures emerged from the smoke ahead. Squad. Weapons raised. No hesitation. No confusion. Only judgment. Step away from the human. Kael'thar didn't move. You have violated direct orders. Still, he said nothing. She is the enemy. His grip tightened slightly as he positioned himself in front of the child. She is a child, he said. Silence followed. Then the sound of weapons. Charging filled the air. Final warning, one of them said. Comply, or be terminated. Kael'thar shifted his stance, pushing the child gently behind him. His body protested the movement. Pain fled through his side. His vision flickered at the edges. None of it mattered. I will not. The first shot came instantly. Kael'thar moved on instinct, deflecting the attack and lunging forward. The fight that followed wasn't balanced. It wasn't strategic. It was survival. Every movement drained what little strength he had left. Every strike he landed was weaker than the last, but he didn't stop. Behind him, the child cried out. He didn't turn. He couldn't. If he looked back, he might hesitate, and hesitation would mean failure. Run, he shouted. The word rough and unfamiliar. She didn't understand it, but she understood his tone. Slowly, uncertainly, she began to move, far in the distance, through the smoke and chaos. Shapes appeared. Ships. Human ships. Hope. Kael'thar forced himself forward, placing himself between the advancing soldiers and the small figure moving away. Behind him, each breath burned. Each step felt heavier than the last. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see her. Small, fragile, alive. That was enough. He made a low sound, something softer than his language was meant to carry. Go! She hesitated. I don't want to leave you. He didn't understand the words, but he understood her voice. And for the first time in his life, Kael'thar smiled. It was awkward, unfamiliar, almost broken. Then he turned back and faced his own kind. The final moments weren't heroic. They weren't clean. They were brutal. Messy, desperate. He fought not to win, but to delay, to hold, to buy time. Every second mattered. Every second meant distance between the child and the war. His movements slowed. His vision dimmed, but he stayed standing until he couldn't. When the humans arrived, they found the child first, a small figure alone in a broken world, crying and pointing back toward the smoke. It's okay, one of them said gently, kneeling beside her. You're safe now. But she shook her head, tears streaming down her face, desperately trying to pull them towards something they couldn't yet see. They followed, and what they found silenced them. A soldier. Surrounded. Outnumbered. Still. Kael. Star lay where he had fallen. His armor shattered, his body broken beyond recovery. But even in death his position told the story. He had stood between the child and everything else later. The recordings were recovered. Helmet footage. Combat logs. Every moment preserved in perfect, unfeeling detail. Human command watched in silence. They saw the hesitation, the choice, the lie, the sacrifice. A soldier who had every reason to follow orders and chose not to. A being raised to hate, who chose to protect. When the footage ended, no one spoke for a long time. Then, quietly, someone said, he saved her. Another voice followed, softer, he died for her. And in that silence, something shifted. The decision that came next wasn't debated. It wasn't argued. It didn't need to be. Any species that protects our children. The words carried weight. Finality is under the protection of humanity. Across the galaxy, the message spread. Fast, unstoppable. And, on a quiet world, far from the battlefield, a small girl looked up at the stars. Her voice was soft, almost lost to the night. Thank you. She didn't know if he could hear her, but for the first time since the war began, the universe felt just a little less empty. The jungle went silent before the sky began to burn. Erya noticed it immediately. She had lived her entire life beneath the dense emerald canopy, where sound was constant chirping insects, distant animal calls, the rustle of leaves in warm winds. Silence did not belong here. Silence meant something was wrong. She paused mid-step, her hands still stained with the soft glow of medicinal sap. Do you hear that? She whispered. The others around her froze. There was nothing, and that was exactly the problem. Then the sky tore open. A streak of fire ripped across the heavens, cutting through the clouds like a blade. The object screamed as it fell, trailing smoke and fragments of burning metal, before crashing somewhere deep beyond the forest ridge. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Erya's chest tightened. War had found them. They reached the crash site. Hours later, the ship was barely recognizably its hull, twisted, split open, blackened by impact. Smoke still curled upward, thick and bitter. The air smelled wrong, metallic and harsh. Erya stepped carefully over the debris, her senses alert. No survivors, one of the villagers murmured. It should have ended there, but then its sound, soft, fragile. Erya turned sharply, scanning the wreckage. Wait, she moved toward the source, pushing aside a scorched panel, ignoring the heat still radiating from it. And then she saw him. A child, human. His skin was burned in places. His breathing shallow. His small body curled protectively as if even in unconsciousness he expected pain. Erya hesitated. Everyone knew what humans were. Dangerous, violent, unpredictable. The stories had spread even to worlds like theirs. One villager stepped back. "We shouldn't." "He's alive," Erya said softly. That was all that mattered to her. They carried him back to the village. Under cover of darkness, no one spoke, no one questioned it aloud. But the tension was there, heavy and suffocating. They hid him beneath Erya's dwelling, where the roots of the great trees formed natural chambers. Safe, hidden, Erya worked through the night, tending to his wounds with careful precision. Her hands moved gently, applying salves binding injuries, cooling burns. The boy stirred once, his lips parting slightly. "Help." The word was faint, barely audible, but it was enough by morning. The village had already begun to change. Whispers replaced conversation. Eyes lingered too long on Erya's home. Fear spread faster than fire ever could. Elder Thune called for a gathering. The entire village stood beneath a central tree, its massive trunk rising like a silent witness to their choices. Thune's voice was steady, but there was weight behind it. "If we keep him, we risk everything." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "If we surrender him," Thune continued, "we lose ourselves." Silence followed, heavy, divided. "He is not one of us," a voice argued. "He is a child," Erya replied. "That child could bring destruction upon us all, and abandoning him makes us what?" No one answered that. The debate stretched long into the night. Survival against morality, fear against compassion. Every argument felt valid, every choice felt wrong. In the end, the decision didn't come from logic. It came from Erya as she stepped forward, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. "I will care for him." She didn't ask for permission. She didn't seek agreement. She simply chose. One by one, others stepped beside her. Not all, but enough. They named him Tomas. It was the only word he could clearly say. When he finally woke, "Tomas," Erya repeated. Gently. He nodded. Weekly. Days passed. Then weeks. The boy healed slowly. At first, he flinched at every movement, every sound. His eyes carried the memory of something terrible. But over time, that changed. He laughed once. Just once. A small, unexpected sound that caught everyone off guard. Erya smiled in return. It felt worth it. But peace never lasts where war has already begun. The ships came without warning. Massive shadows descending from the sky, blocking out the sun. The jungle fell silent again. This time, out of fear. Search parties followed. Armed, methodical. Relentless. They moved through the forest with precision, scanning, probing, leaving nothing unchecked. One of them stopped outside Erya's dwelling. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give them away. "Life signs detected," the soldier said. Erya stepped forward slowly. "Just animals," she replied, her voice steady despite everything. The soldier studied her, longer than necessary. Behind her, hidden beneath the roots, Tomas held his breath. The silence stretched. Then the soldier turned and walked away. Relief didn't come, because Erya knew it wasn't over. Eventually, they knew. The soldiers returned. More of them this time. Weapons drawn. Purpose clear. Hand over the human. Their leader demanded. No pretense, no patience. The village gathered. No one spoke at first. Then Elder Thune stepped forward. Old, fragile, unarmed. Double quotes. "No." The word felt heavier than anything spoken before. "You understand the consequences?" the soldier said. "Yes." Murmurs spread behind Thune, but no one stepped back. Not this time. Erya stood beside Tomas, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Trembled. She squeezed slightly. "It's okay," she whispered. It wasn't, but she needed him to believe it. Above them, the warships shifted, weapons charging. A low hum filled the air. growing louder with each passing second. This is your final warning. No one moved. The jungle, once full of life, now stood frozen, waiting, watching. The sky began to glow, and then it stopped. The hum faded. The light dimmed. Hey! Stronger. Human ships. They dropped from orbit like thunder, their presence shaking the very air. Weapons locked instantly onto the alien fleet, engines roaring with restrained power. The soldiers hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty crossed their faces. Then, without a word, they retreated. Silence returned, but this time, it felt different. From above, human commanders observed everything. The standoff, the choice, the defiance. Erya didn't understand their language as they descended, but she understood the way they looked at her, at Tamaz, at the village, not with suspicion, not with anger, but with something deeper. Recognition. Elder Thune stood before them once more. We did what was right, he said simply. The human commander studied him for a long moment, then nodded. And so will we. The words spread far beyond the jungle, beyond the planet, across the stars. You stood where others would not. A pause, deliberate, unshakable. Now we stand for you. And for the first time since the sky had burned, the jungle came alive. Again. Not with fear, but with something stronger. Hope. They called him a monster. Long before anyone ever saw his face. Stories spread faster than ships in the Outer Rim. Entire colonies erased overnight. Fleets torn apart like they were made of paper. Survive as if they were unspoken fragments, their voices shaking as they described something massive. Unstoppable. Merciless. Gorrak. The name alone was enough to silence a room. Most of the galaxy. He wasn't just a warlord. He was a force of nature, violence given form. No one questioned it anymore. No one tried to understand it. Because monsters didn't need understanding. They needed to be stopped. Target confirmed. The voice came through the comm channel. Steady, but tense. Human intelligence officer Reyes leaned forward in her seat. Eyes locked on the flickering holographic feed in front of her. The image was unstable, distorted by interference and residual heat signatures. Repeat that, she said quietly. Thermal readings match. Movement detected in Sector 9. It's him. Reyes exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening against the console. They'd been tracking Gorrak for months. Following the trail of destruction he left behind, burned settlements, shattered defenses, empty cities that still smelled of smoke. Every report painted the same picture. No survivors, no mercy, no hesitation. Deploy recon drones, Reyes ordered. I want visual confirmation. The operator nodded, already issuing commands. On the display, small surveillance drones descended through the atmosphere of the ruined world below. Smoke drifted across the broken skyline, remnants of a battle that had ended only hours earlier. Or perhaps, one that had never really ended. The feed stabilized, and for a moment, no one spoke. Gorrak stood in the center of a collapsed street. Even through the grainy footage, his size was undeniable. Towering, broad, armored in what looked less like equipment, and more like an extension of his own body. Scars marked his form, evidence of battles fought and survived. This was the creature they had feared, the one responsible for so much death. But that wasn't what froze the room. It was what he was doing. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't even moving. With purpose, he was kneeling. And in his arms was a child. What am I looking at? One of the operators whispered. No one answered because no one understood. The child was human. Small. Fragile. Wrapped clumsily in what looked like torn fabric, perhaps taken from the ruins around them. She was crying, softly, and Gorrak, the monster of the Outer Rim, was trying to comfort her. His massive hands moved with surprising care, adjusting the makeshift covering around her. His posture was awkward, uncertain, as if he didn't quite understand what he was doing but was trying anyway. He made a low sound, not a growl, not a threat, something softer, something almost gentle. Reyes felt something shift in her chest. This has to be wrong, someone muttered. It's a trap. Maybe it was It should have been. That would have made sense. But nothing about this made sense. The child spoke then, her voice faint but clear enough to pick up through the drone's audio filters. It hurts. Gorrak stilled for a brief moment. He looked lost. Then, carefully he shifted her in his arms, adjusting her position to ease her discomfort. I know, he said. His voice was rough, deep, unused to softness. I know. Reyes leaned closer to the screen, her mind racing. This wasn't possible. Creatures like him didn't do this. They didn't hesitate. They didn't protect. They destroyed. Ma'am, the operator said cautiously. Orders. Reyes didn't respond immediately, because for the first time since this mission began, she wasn't sure what the right order was. Maintain observation, she said finally. No engagement. The hunt had just become something else entirely. Hours passed. Gorrak moved through the ruins slowly, deliberately. He avoided open spaces, staying close to cover, his senses constantly scanning for threats. Not for himself, for the child. Mia. That was her name. They learned it from fragments of her speech, pieced together through repeated words, and soft, broken sentences. She clung to him without hesitation. No. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she understood something simple. He hadn't hurt her and everything else had. Why? Reyes whispered to herself, watching the feed laid into the cycle. Why her? Why now? What changed? The answer didn't come. Instead, more problems did. He's being tracked, another operator reported. Multiple signals converging on his position. Reyes frowned. Who? Bounty hunters. At least 3 different groups. And, he hesitated. 2 military signatures. Of course, a target like Gorrak didn't stay hidden for long. He won't survive that. Someone said. Reyes didn't reply, because that wasn't what concerned her. He won't, she said quietly, but the child definitely won't. The first attack came fast. A strike team dropped into the ruins, weapons already firing. Explosions tore through the buildings, sending debris crashing down around them. Gorrak reacted instantly, not with aggression, with protection. He shielded Mia with his body, taking the brunt of the blast against his back. The impact drove him to one knee, but he didn't let go of her, didn't even loosen his grip. Stay behind me, he growled. She didn't understand the words, but she obeyed anyway. The fight that followed was brutal, efficient. Gorrak moved with terrifying precision, dismantling the attackers one by one. But even as he fought, his attention never strayed far from Mia. Every movement calculated, every strike measured. Not to win, to survive, and more importantly, to keep her alive. He's not fighting like a warlord, Reyes said, watching intently. He's fighting like... She stopped, because the word felt too strange to say. A guardian. The realization settled over the room like a weight. Days passed. The chase intensified. More hunters, more threats, more battles. Each one left its mark. Gorrak slowed. His movements grew heavier, his wounds deeper, but he never stopped at night. When the world fell quiet, Mia would curl up against him, her small form pressed against his massive frame. Are you a monster? She asked, once a voice sleepy. Gorrak didn't answer immediately. He looked down at her, at the fragile being who had somehow changed everything. I was, he said finally. She yawned. Okay. And just like that, it didn't matter. Reyes felt something tighten in her chest as she listened, because for the first time, she didn't see a target. She saw a choice. The final confrontation came without warning. Human forces arrived first, ships descending rapidly, weapons locked. Target acquired, one of the soldiers reported. As they surrounded Gorrak's position, Reyes stood at the center of the command deck, her heart steady, but heavy. Hold fire, she ordered. On the ground, Gorrak stood still. Exhausted, wounded but unyielding. Mia clung to him tightly. They're going to hurt you, she whispered. Gorrak shook his head slightly. No, he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Weapons aimed, tension rising. One wrong move and it would all end. Drop the child, a human soldier shouted. Gorrak didn't move. Instead he knelt, slowly, carefully lowering himself between Mia and every weapon pointed in their direction. I will not fight, he said. The soldiers hesitated, confusion spreading through their ranks. Reyes stepped forward, her voice cutting through the standoff. Why? Gorrak looked at her, then down, at the child. Because she matters. Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Mia stepped forward, small, fragile, terrified. Don't hurt him, she cried. He's my protector. And just like that, everything changed. Reyes closed her eyes for a brief moment, then gave the only order that made sense anymore. Stand down. Weapons lowered. Tension broke. Later, when the reports were reviewed, when the truth spread beyond that ruined world, the galaxies struggled to understand. A monster. Who chose to protect? and humanity. They didn't hesitate. Any species capable of this. The statement echoed across every system, is not our enemy. And for the first time in a long time, the word monster began to lose its meaning. The broadcast began without warning, no announcement, no introduction, no explanation. One moment, the galaxy was moving as it always did, ships crossing trade lanes, negotiations unfolding in distant systems, conflicts simmering beneath fragile truces, and the next. Every major channel was overridden, every screen flickered, and a single image replaced them all. A child stood at the center of the frame, human, small, fragile, covered in dust and streaks of dried tears. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the fabric of her torn clothing, her eyes scanning the crowd around her as if searching for someone who wasn't there. Where is my mom? Her voice cracked. No one answered. The camera pulled back and the scale of what was happening became clear. They were in a public square, massive, enclosed by towering structures of cold, metallic design. The architecture was severe, imposing, built not for comfort but for control. And surrounding the child were civilians, dozens of them. Different shapes, different forms, different ages, but all sharing the same expression. Fear and something else, something quieter, something stronger. Step away from the human. The voice came from off-screen at first, amplified and distorted through unseen speakers. Authoritative, absolute. The crowd didn't move. A figure stepped into view. Tall, armored, face hidden behind a reflective visor. An executioner. This individual is classified as a hostile species, the voice continued. Harboring it is an act of treason against the state. Still, no one moved. The child looked around again, her breathing quickening. Please, she whispered. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. One of the civilians, older figure, slightly hunched. Movements slow with age, stepped forward, not away, forward. They placed themselves between the child and the executioner. A ripple passed through the crowd, then another stepped forward, then another, until a circle formed, unarmed, untrained, terrified, but unmoving. This is your final warning, the executioner said, voice sharpening. Disperse immediately, or be treated as a blesses. The older figure didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't plead. They simply stood there, and the others followed. Across the galaxy, billions watched at first. It was curiosity, a spectacle, something unusual in a universe filled with conflict. But then, the first shot rang out. The sound was sharp, final. One of the civilians fell. Their body hit the ground with a heavy, lifeless thud. The child screamed, but the circle didn't break. No one ran, no one stepped back. Instead, they closed the gap, tightening the formation, protecting her. Why aren't they moving? Someone whispered on a distant world. No one answered, because there was no logical answer. The second shot came, then a third, each one taking another life. Each one met with the same response. They held their ground inside the system broadcasting the event. A silent observer recorded everything. BERITAS-9. An autonomous journalist AI, designed to document truth without bias, without emotion, without interference. It processed the data as it came. Visual input, audio signals, behavioral patterns. Conclusion. The civilians were aware of the consequences. Probability of survival, near zero. And yet, they remained. Explain this behavior. A remote analyst demanded through a secure channel. Veritas-9 responded without hesitation. Observed actions indicate protective intent against a superior force. Confirmed reason. A pause. Just a fraction of a second. Unusual for an AI of its capacity. Insufficient data. The broadcast continued. The child had stopped crying, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was watching them. One of the civilians smaller than the others. Their movements quick, despite visible fear, turned slightly toward her. They made a soft sound, reassuring, gentle. It's okay, they said, not in her language, but somehow she understood. The next shot came, and they fell. The circle grew smaller. Across the galaxy, reactions began to shift. What had started as curiosity became discomfort, then unease, then something heavier on Earth. The broadcast reached every network, every home. Every device. Silence spread. People stopped what they were doing, watched, listened. Double quotes. Why? Someone whispered. No one had an answer. The executors continued. Slow, methodical. Unstoppable, but the civilians never broke. Not once. Each time one fell, another stepped forward. Each time the circle weakened. It reformed, protecting the child, until only a handful remained. The executioner paused, not out of mercy, but confusion. This is illogical, the amplified voice stated. One of the remaining civilians, injured, barely able to stand, lifted their head. Maybe, they said quietly, but it's right. The final shots echoed through the square, and then silence. The camera lingered. The child stood alone, surrounded by still bodies, breathing alive. BERITAS-9 recorded the outcome. Primary objective of civilians achieved. The human child survived. Transmission complete. The broadcast ended, but its impact didn't. Across the galaxy, something shifted. Not immediately, not loudly, but undeniably. On Earth, no one spoke for a long time. The footage replayed again and again. Analyzed, dissected, but never fully understood. They knew they would die, one official said, and they stayed anyway. Another replied. The room fell silent. Because there was only one conclusion left. They chose her. Not because of alliances, not because of politics, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That changed everything. The response from Earth came swiftly, not as retaliation, not as anger, but as something else entirely. A declaration. Clear, unambiguous, unavoidable. Any species that chooses to protect human life at the cost of their own. A pause. Heavy with meaning. Will be placed under the full protection of humanity. The message spread faster than the broadcast ever had. Through trade networks, military channels, civilian relays. Everywhere. And for the first time, the galaxy didn't just hear humanity. It understood them, not as conquerors, not as threats, but as something far more dangerous. Loyal because now, everyone knew if you stood for one of theirs, they would stand for you. No matter the cost. Jiro's eyes blinked open to a sky he barely recognized. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape that had become his home. His small hands traced the soft petals of the plants around him, unfamiliar yet comforting in their strange symmetry. He had grown up here, among the Kethari, a gentle, pacifist species whose lives moved in quiet harmony with the land. He had learned their ways, their language, the rhythms of their days, and yet, a part of him had always remembered the humans who had once been his own. Captain Alina Ward and her team stepped cautiously through the undergrowth, scanning the terrain. Earth had received the distress signal too late to save Jiro initially, but his location had been pinpointed. When the Kethari had sent signals of their own in warning, humanity had responded immediately, expecting an isolated rescue operation. What they had found instead was a community that had nurtured the child they were sent to recover. A community that had risked everything to keep him safe. Jiro turned at the sound of movement and froze. These were humans, his own species, but he did not run. He had never seen humans like this, armored, disciplined, and yet there was something familiar about them. Captain Ward knelt down, carefully lowering herself to Jiro's level. Jiro? She asked softly. The boy's eyes widened, uncertainty and relief warring in their depths. He wanted to run to her, but the faces of the Kethari around him held his attention. He had been raised with them. They had fed him, healed him, protected him. He owed them everything. The Kethari elders emerged quietly, led by the tall, serene figure of their leader. Their expressions were calm, though wary. The humans' arrival was unexpected, yet the Kethari had expected such an eventuality. They had prepared nothing for hostility, for they had never considered the child's return might come with demands or coercion. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent negotiation of trust, morality, and obligation. Captain Ward spoke carefully. We're here for Jiro. You've kept him safe, and we thank you for that. But it's time for him to come home. She gestured to the boy, her eyes soft but firm. Jiro's hands clenched into small fists. I can't leave them, he whispered. They saved me. They are my family. His voice cracked with emotion, a mixture of fear and devotion. One of the Kethari stepped forward. He is yours, the elder said slowly, if you can understand the choice he makes. Their voice was calm, resonant, carrying the weight of centuries of peace and wisdom. He will go only if he wishes it. The captain's jaw tightened. She had encountered difficult situations before, but this was unlike anything she had faced. A child refusing to leave the beings who had saved him was not insubordination. It was gratitude, and it carried a lesson she could not ignore. Jiro looked back at the Kethari, their faces gentle and unwavering. His heart ached. Every memory, every lesson, every moment spent in their care, pressed upon him. The humans before him were his kin, yet the Kethari were his protectors, his teachers, his family. The choice was unbearable. Ward stepped closer, lowering her voice. Jiro, I understand. I don't want to take you from them unfairly, but we can't stay. There are others who need protection. There are threats beyond this place. You have to come with us, and we will ensure your friends here are safe. Safety. That word carried weight. It suggested protection, promise, a guarantee. Could she really promise that for the Keth? Jiro looked at his adopted family, then back at Captain Ward. A tear slid down his cheek. He swallowed hard, the resolve in his young chest beginning to harden. I want them to be safe, he said finally. Not just me. They stayed. They risked everything for me. If we leave, and they are harmed, I can't live with that. His voice was firm, unshakable despite the tremble in his hands. But Kethari stepped closer. Their collective presence a silent support for Jiro's decision. They did not push him, nor did they attempt to persuade him otherwise. They had raised him, protected him, and now, they honored his choice. Captain Ward nodded slowly, understanding the depth of the boy's words. Humanity had always valued loyalty, courage, and compassion. Here was a child exemplifying all three in their purest form. She spoke again, her tone resolute. Then we will do whatever it takes to ensure their safety. We will not leave until they are free from threat. Jiro felt a surge of relief. The humans were not abandoning their adopted family. They would protect them, just as the Kethari had protected him. For the first time, the tension in his chest eased, replaced by a cautious hope. The mission transformed overnight. What had begun as a straightforward rescue became a liberation operation. Human forces coordinated with Jiro and the Kethari to identify the oppressors, an interstellar power that had enslaved the Kethari and exploited their planet's resources. Intelligence reports revealed that these raiders had prepared to capture Jiro, not for rescue, but as leverage. Now, with human intervention and Jiro's guidance, they had the advantage. The planning was meticulous. Every detail of the enemy's operation was considered, strategies were debated, resources allocated, contingencies prepared. Jiro contributed where he could, sharing knowledge of the terrain, the raiders' patterns, and his people's strengths. The Kethari moved alongside him, their trust in the humans growing as the plan took shape. On the day of the operation, dawn broke over the horizon with a quiet intensity. The Kethari and human forces advanced in coordinated movements, silently approaching the enemy encampment. Jiro's heart pounded in his chest, but he moved with a confidence born from years of trust and survival. The stakes were monumental. Failure was not an option. The battle erupted with sudden ferocity. Human ships provided precision strikes from above, targeting fortifications and isolating enemy units. On the ground, the Kethari demonstrated their resilience and skill, moving with fluid grace and tactical awareness. Jiro stayed close to his people, guiding and encouraging them. His presence a bridge between the two forces. Chaos reigned, but control remained in the hands of those who valued life. The raiders' aggression was met not only with superior force, but with strategy and ingenuity. The Kethari's intimate knowledge of their environment turned the terrain into an ally. Every movement, every strike, every maneuver was calculated to minimize casualties and protect those who could not defend themselves. As the battle reached its climax, the enemy command structure collapsed. The raiders, disoriented and demoralized, began to surrender. Jiro watched as his adoptive family, once threatened with destruction, now stood triumphant and free. Relief and pride surged through him. A weight lifted from his young shoulders. Captain Ward approached him amidst the aftermath. You did well, she said softly. Your choice saved them, and now they are free because of you. Jiro nodded, the tears returning to his eyes. He looked at the Kethari, their faces serene but weary, and understood the depth of their sacrifices and patience. He had been given life, protection, and love by these beings, and now he could ensure their safety as well. The declaration from Earth came shortly after. The Kethari were formally placed under the protection of humanity, their planet, recognized as sovereign, and safeguarded against exploitation. The boy who had been rescued had ensured not only his own survival, but that of an entire species that had shown extraordinary courage and compassion. Jiro stood beside the captain, looking at the horizon, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He was no longer just a child to be protected. He was a witness to the power of loyalty, courage, and moral conviction. Humanity had chosen to honor those who had honored him, rewriting the rules of interstellar engagement, not with force, but with acknowledgement and respect. The Kethari moved among their people, tending to the wounded, restoring what had been broken. Jiro followed, helping where he could, his presence a symbol of unity between species. In this moment, he understood what it truly meant to be part of something larger than himself, a network of trust, protection, and shared responsibility. As the sun set, casting long golden shadows over the liberated land, Jiro looked up at the sky. He now understood in a new way. He was still human, yet he carried within him the heart and lessons of another world. And as he felt the gentle touch of the Kethari elders on his shoulders, he realized that his identity was no longer defined solely by species or birth, but by the choices he made, the lives he touched, and the compassion he had been shown. This was more than rescue, more than survival. It was a testament to the power of empathy, courage, and unwavering loyalty. And for Jiro, it was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for himself, but for the bond between humanity and those who had risked everything to protect him. The courtroom was vast, stretching farther than any human mind could comfortably grasp. Its walls glimmered with polished alloys, reflecting the light from hundreds of distant stars. Yet there was an oppressive weight in the air that no architectural grandeur could mask. Every seat was filled with observers, diplomats, military liaisons, journalists, and representatives from species across the galaxy. At the center, a massive circular dais rose, and upon it stood the defendant Spezia. Collective of beings unlike any humans had encountered before, their forms diverse yet unified in purpose and demeanor. They had been accused of an unimaginable crime, harboring a human child, an act that, by human law, could have been construed as abduction. Judge Amina Solis adjusted her robes and scanned the assembly. She was known for fairness, for the ability to weigh morality against law with precision. But even she felt the unusual gravity of this case settle deep within her chest. The stakes were not just legal, they were moral, ethical, and perhaps even existential. Noah, the human child at the center of it all, sat quietly beside the judge's bench. His small hands were folded, his eyes wide with the weight of knowledge far beyond his years. He had lived with these aliens, learning their language, their culture, their ways, and now he held the power to sway the decision of an entire species' fate. His heart was torn. How could he testify against the very beings who had kept him alive, who had treated him as family, when all he knew of humanity was distant, fearful authority? The trial opened with procedural formalities, the cold recitation of charges and statutes. "You stand accused," Judge Solis intoned, "of the crime of abducting a human child. How do you plead?" The leader of the defendants, Raul, stepped forward, his posture rigid but calm. His voice was deep, resonant, filled with an authority born of experience and pride. "We pled not guilty, Your Honor. We have only ever acted to protect him." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The notion of an entire species acting with such deliberate compassion was nearly incomprehensible to the human attendees. "Explain," Solis demanded. "Explain why harboring this child, in defiance of interstellar law and human jurisdiction, was necessary." Raul lifted his eyes, scanning the courtroom. "Your Honor, the child was in immediate danger. His species humans were not present. His survival was uncertain. To abandon him would have been a choice we could not, in conscience, make. We do not ask for your mercy. We ask only for your understanding." The prosecution rose with a cold precision. "Evidence shows that you removed the child from human territory without authorization. The law is clear. Regardless of intent, this constitutes a violation of sovereignty. If allowed to go unpunished, it sets a dangerous precedent." Noah shifted in his seat. The words sounded logical, like they were meant to convince, but they clashed violently with what he knew to be true. He remembered the nights spent in hiding, the moments of fear and hunger, the tenderness with which Raul and his people tended to him. They had saved him when no one else would. They had treated him as more than a statistic, more than a pawn in interstellar politics. The cross-examination began, and Noah's voice was called upon. His small frame stood on the witness platform, but his presence filled the room with an unexpected authority. I was scared," he began, voice trembling slightly. "They kept me safe. They fed me when I had nothing. They taught me things I didn't know I could learn, and they never hurt me. Not once." The courtroom fell silent. An observer from a distant council whispered, "This is unprecedented. Human testimony in favor of an alien species is unheard of, Noah continued, drawing strength from the memories of kindness. They protected me even when it could have cost them everything. They didn't just hide me, they stood between me and danger. They chose me when they didn't have to, and I know they would do it again. Rawl's eyes glimmered. He nodded slightly, as if to affirm the child's words, yet he maintained a stoic posture, aware of the gravity of the moment. The defense presented holographic evidence, recordings of the Kethari shielding Noah from predators, tending to his wounds, teaching him how to survive in their harsh world. Footage of entire units standing firm against aggressors, refusing to abandon the child even under direct threat, played across the courtroom's massive screens. Judge Solis watched closely, her brow furrowed. She had seen countless cases, but none like this. Here was a species, entirely different from humans, demonstrating moral courage that transcended law. Every instinct in her body urged her to acknowledge the truth of their actions. The prosecution countered with pointed questions, emphasizing legality, sovereignty, and precedent. Do you deny, they pressed, that your actions could have led to diplomatic incident or retaliation against your species? Rawl's voice was steady, calm, unwavering. We acknowledge the risk, but conscience cannot be measured by law alone. To act otherwise would have been a betrayal of life itself. Noah looked around, realizing the full extent of the courtroom's attention. All eyes were upon him, but he found clarity in the choice he had to make. His voice rose slightly, imbued with certainty. They chose me. They protected me. And if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be here. And I can't stand by and let anyone punish them for doing what was right. A hush fell over the courtroom. The judges, the human representatives, even the interstellar observers, all absorbed in the profound weight of a child's testimony. Veritas Neen, the autonomous AI reporter stationed discreetly, processed the data and relayed findings with clerical precision. The moral argument presented outweighed legal precedents in nearly all historical interstellar cases. The choice to protect life, even at immense personal cost, had precedence in multiple humanitarian doctrines, though none had ever applied to a non-human species in this manner. As testimony continued, more evidence came forth: footage of the Kethari refusing to trade Noah for their own safety, scenes of negotiation with hostile forces where the child's well-being was prioritized above all else, and records of their own species' internal debates showing consensus in protecting the boy rather than exploiting him. Judge Solis leaned forward, fingers steepled. Your actions, she addressed Rawl and his people, demonstrate a level of moral integrity rarely observed, even among humans. You risked extinction for a child of another species, solely for the sake of his life. This is extraordinary. Rawl bowed his head slightly. We ask not for reward or pardon, only that our actions be understood and judged on their merits. The final arguments were presented. The prosecution, unable to dispute the moral imperative displayed, relied heavily on law, precedents, and potential political fallout. The defense in Noah's testimony leaned on empathy, moral responsibility, and undeniable evidence of courage and sacrifice. After hours of deliberation, Judge Solis stood. Her voice carried through the chamber, echoing against metal and glass. This court has considered the evidence, the testimony, and the extraordinary circumstances of this case. It is the finding of this tribunal that the accused acted in accordance with the highest principles of morality and compassion. Their actions preserved a human life at unimaginable risk to their own species. Accordingly, they are hereby granted protected status under human jurisdiction. They are not to be harmed, threatened, or interfered with by any human authority or allied species. A ripple of disbelief passed through the room. Observers whispered to one another, some in shock, others in admiration. Humanity had extended protection not for conquest, not for political gain, but for moral courage and selfless action. Noah stepped forward, his small hands shaking slightly, voice firm. Thank you, he said simply, for listening, for seeing them, for understanding. Rawl inclined his head, and the rest of his species echoed gestures of gratitude and quiet relief. A burden they had carried for months, perhaps years, had finally been recognized. Outside the courtroom, news feeds spread, the verdict at light speed. Across star systems, species, both human and non-human, celebrated a new precedent. The story of the child and his protectors became legend, a tale of moral courage, surpassing fear, law, and tradition. Noah returned to his guardians, walking beside them with a sense of completion. he had never known. He was human, but he carried the lessons of his alien family, the bond forged in the crucible of choice, sacrifice, and unwavering protection. Humanity had judged, and in judging, they had chosen not vengeance, not retribution, not fear but recognition of what is truly right. The ripple of this verdict would be felt across generations, teaching that the measure of a species is not in its power, but in its compassion, and that courage and loyalty transcend boundaries of race, origin, or form. The Kethari stood tall, not as defendants, not as survivors, but as a species honored for their conscience, their courage, and their unwavering dedication to life. And Noah, small but resolute, carried with him the proof that choices made with empathy and moral clarity can change the course of the galaxy forever. A single message had traveled faster than any fleet, sharper than any weapon, and heavier than any treaty. Across the galactic trade lanes, through communication hubs and private channels, it spread with a quiet authority. Do not touch them. They protected one of ours. Admiral Kieran Holt watched the streams of incoming reports from his command bridge. Screens flickered with images from dozens of sector's ships, halting mid-flight. Fleets repositioning. Ambassadors hesitating mid-negotiation. Entire species paused, unsure whether the words were a threat, a warning, or a promise. Holt knew. Humanity had decided, and the galaxy would feel the weight of that decision. The species in question, quiet, unassuming, almost insignificant too. Most stood at the edge of known space, bewildered. They had never sought glory, conquest, or attention. They had only done what their hearts demanded, protected a human child when no one else would. And now, because of that single act, the full force of human loyalty had been pledged to them. Across multiple worlds, diplomats scrambled to understand what this meant. Alliances shifted overnight. Ships that were on patrol diverted to defensive postures. Fleets that had planned shows of power hesitated, their commanders unsure how to proceed. Testing humanity's resolve had become unthinkable. One misstep could trigger a response no civilization dared to provoke. Within the ranks of the protected species, confusion and awe mingled. They had lived simple lives, their culture grounded in cooperation and community, not interstellar politics. Now they were being hailed as untouchable, their survival guaranteed by a distant species whose motives had always been opaque. They didn't fully understand this power, but they felt it. A weight and a shield combined, and they trembled under its magnitude. Holt's voice carried through the bridge, calm yet uncompromising. We do not threaten. We do not seek vengeance. We do not negotiate when this principle is at stake. Any act against them, any harm inflicted, will be met with immediate and overwhelming response. Do we understand each other? The officers nodded, the words resonating across channels. A formal declaration of intent, an unwavering loyalty. Word reached the Galactic Council, a coalition that had long viewed humanity as unpredictable and overbearing. They convened emergency sessions, debating whether to challenge the declaration, test human patience, or seek compromise. Every proposal was weighed against the reality. One species had protected one of ours, and humanity's word was absolute. Testing that resolve could ignite conflict, unlike anything the Council had experienced. As the deliberations dragged on, scouts reported unusual behavior near the protected species' homeworld. Other factions, unwilling to accept the new balance of power, attempted small incursions, probing defenses, testing protocols. Each time, human fleets responded not in overwhelming displays of destruction, but in precision, showing readiness and commitment, signaling that the protection was real and immediate. The galaxy quickly learned that the message was not idle rhetoric. Meanwhile, within the protected species communities, life continued, though under a strange, heightened awareness. Daily routines persisted, gathering food, maintaining habitats, teaching their young, but each action carried the knowledge that they were now under the watchful eye of a force far beyond anything they had imagined. Children played without fear, elders walked with a measured confidence, and the once sumptuous population moved with the pride of those whose moral courage had been acknowledged on a cosmic scale. Holt understood the delicate balance. Humanity had declared a principle, not conquest. This was about loyalty, about morality, about sending a signal that some act's protection of life, selfless courage demanded recognition. It was a reminder to the galaxy that humanity's true strength lay not just in military power, but in the integrity and decisiveness with which they honored those who did right. Reports arrived of hostile factions reconsidering their tactics. Planned attacks were called off, negotiations reopened, and even long-standing grudges were put on hold. The ripple effect was staggering. Humanity had reshaped diplomatic and military dynamics without firing a single weapon, simply by acting. On a moral imperative, the protected species struggled to comprehend the scale of what had happened. Their daily lives had been simple, but now, wherever they moved, wherever they gathered, there was a profound sense of security and reverence. Outsiders approached with caution, diplomacy, or outright deference. Their very existence had been elevated because they had done what was right. Holt walked among his officers, discussing strategy not as planners of war, but as guardians of a principle. "This isn't about expansion, isn't about domination," he exclaimed. "It's about making sure that those who act with courage and compassion are never left vulnerable. That's the message we send, not with threats, but with clarity and commitment." As time passed, other species began to report similar incidents, humans intervening only when moral lines were crossed, protecting those who had protected others, defending the helpless, honoring acts of courage. The message had evolved from a single act to a broader understanding. Humanity would stand for life, integrity, and loyalty in ways the galaxy had never seen. The galaxy itself began to shift. Trade routes adjusted, alliances redefined, and even cultural norms started to reflect a new respect for those who upheld moral courage. Stories spread tales of the small, unassuming species that had protected a human child, and in turn, had been granted sanctuary by the might of humanity. Legends formed, not of conquest, but of principle. Holt watched transmissions from various sectors, noting the subtle changes in behavior. In diplomacy, in caution mixed with respect, he understood that humanity's declaration had created a new standard, one that would resonate across generations. It wasn't a law written in statutes, but a code written in action. The galaxy had witnessed not the strength of weapons, but the strength of conviction. On the home world of the protected species, life moved on. Children played, elders taught, and the guardians who had once risked everything for a single human child now lived under a canopy of security and recognition. They were free to exist as they always had, yet with a new sense of purpose, a new awareness of the impact of their actions. No one ever doubted the truth of the message again. Humanity had spoken, humanity had acted, and the galaxy had listened. From the bridge of his command ship, Holt allowed himself a rare moment of quiet. He looked out into the stars, vast and indifferent, yet now dotted with civilizations who knew that protection, loyalty, and courage were values humanity would enforce without hesitation. One act of compassion had redefined interstellar politics. One child had changed the balance of power. One species' moral choice had become a shield across the galaxy. And for the first time in countless cycles of diplomacy and conflict, the galaxy understood that humanity's greatest weapon was not its fleets, not its firepower, but its willingness to stand unwaveringly for what was right. The protected species had done the unimaginable. Humanity had responded in kind, and together, they had reshaped the cosmos without a single shot fired in anger, proving that loyalty, courage, and compassion could be as powerful as any armada. The message echoed still, "Do not touch them. They protected one of ours." And every corner of the galaxy remembered, understood, and respected it.